What's up, guys? Welcome to Daily Dose of Reddit. This is your host that is so excited to be getting a PS5 on release date. I watched that screen for hours to make that pre-order, so I'm definitely glad I got it. I'm going ham on this console generation. I got the PS5, the headset, the freaking Demon Souls, and the Miles Morales Ultimate Edition. Like, I'm going crazy. Let me know in the comments what you guys are getting. Zach in today's subreddit is r/StoriesAboutKevin. Alright, this story's called My Encounter with Kavina, the Amazing Horsewoman. This occurred 7 or 8 years ago when I worked for a small rural tourism business which did horseback trail rides. Some horseback trail ride places basically give you the horse and let you go, but the owner of this place cared about the horses and safety, so the trail guides were very involved, giving instructions and support on the rides. This ride was a shared ride. Anybody could book in, and it was for experienced riders. At the beginning of the ride, we only know what they share in the booking paperwork. Enter the cast and their horses. Trail guide, 27, female, experienced rodeo rider and horse trainer on Mean Horse. If she got off the horse, she'd have to fight to get back on. However, the Mean Horse doesn't allow any other horse to overtake her, so she's good for crowd control and needed the exercise. Riders 1 and 2, 20s, female, 2 friends who booked together. They were on standard horse 1 and 2. The only thing that you need to know about these are that the riders knew what they were doing pretty well, and the horses were generally used to gently cart absolute beginner adults around. Kavina, 60s, female, apparently a horse rider for decades. She was on Sweetheart Horse. Sweetheart Horse was a beloved horse at that place. Every time we had a rider under the age of 7 years old, Sweetheart Horse was the one to use. The only way Sweetheart Horse ever misbehaved was scratching its butt on trees. Kavina's unfortunate grandson, 12, male. No horse experience, literally never seen one in person. He was on Gentle Horse. Gentle Horse was also good with kids and was low in the horse pecking order. He followed at the back and he minded his own business. Me, around 18, female, had worked for this place since I was 14, on Tall Horse. At this stage, you may notice that this is a ride for experienced people, with several experienced riders from another group, and Kavina's unfortunate grandson is at a disadvantage. Or Cug, let's call him Cug. Well, I was added to the ride to basically make sure if Cug needed help, someone was on hand, since my coworker was not going to be easily getting off and on to Mean Horse. Tall Horse was not exactly easy to get on and off, but at least he didn't actively try and make it hard. As soon as we leave, we begin running into issues. First, we ride down a relatively big sand hill. Cug asks what to do, and Kavina tells him, "Put your heels back, put your thumbs on top of the reins, and hug with your knees. Remember to breathe," and many other textbook riding school instructions. He does none of it, evidently not knowing what it means. At this stage, my literal job description is give easy instructions. From behind him, I called, "Just lean back a bit, make sure you don't drop the reins." He did. I didn't notice Kavina getting annoyed. Yet. In the next stretch, it's fairly boring, so Kavina begins moving out of line to go behind Cug, take a photo, move ahead of him, take a photo, move behind him, take a photo, etc. I generally don't have an issue with this in this area, if the riders know what they're doing. Kavina does, Cug doesn't, and because Cug's Gentle Horse is so low in the pecking order, he gets stressed out by the other horses moving around him so much. I can begin to see that Cug is getting stressed too, and that's stressing his horse out, and it's starting to become a little hard for him to manage. The conversation goes like this: "Ma'am, would you mind going back in front and staying there? Your grandson's horse is getting stressed out, and it's getting risky." "How long have you been riding?" "Sorry?" "I asked, how long have you been riding?" "Since I was 6, so 12 years. "Well, I've been riding decades, so I know more than you." "Okay, but it's my job to make sure your son is safe, and you're stressing his horse out." "Really? Come on, it's just photos." However, she does slow down enough that the horses cope. She still goes in front and behind over the next half mile or so until the trail gets too narrow, but she does make a big show of asking permission each time. She continues giving overly complicated instructions to Cug every time we reach an obstacle. I continue doing the literal script we followed. The rule at that business was to always assume nobody knew anything about horses, even if they said they did. So the instructions were very basic. She's trying to give more riding school instructions to her grandson, who is listening to me and the other guide instead. Smart kid. At one stage, when doing small, fast stretches, my ongoing instructions started to really get on Kavina's nerves. She gets behind Cug in the line just to talk to me and says this:
"What is your name?"
Name.
"I've been riding for decades and you've been very disrespectful. I will be speaking to your manager when we get back."
Alright, my manager's name is Name, and you can find her in Color Building when we get back. That wasn't the reaction she wanted, but I was working for a relative in this small rural area anyway, and had been fired precisely 2 days earlier in an argument, so I wasn't afraid to be fired again. We eventually get to a long, sandy stretch that we always use for the faster parts of these rides. It's perfect. It is straight, with trees on both sides, but no obstacles in the middle, going uphill in deep sand. The horses basically can't bolt away on you, because they'll naturally slow down. By this stage, we've already given how-to instructions for the smaller fast sections, so it doesn't need a lot of instruction. This is the entirety of what my coworker said.
"Once we go around this corner, I'll make my horse go faster. If your horse doesn't follow, give them a little kick. The most important thing is stay in your line. Don't overtake."
Then the trail guide went around the corner and kicked her horse into a light canter. Riders 1 and 2 followed, then Cug, their horse running without needing a kick, because the horses were all trained to know this part was the running part. Sweetheart Horse began to follow. Then Kavina gave Sweetheart Horse by far the largest, hardest kick in the ribs I have ever seen from a customer. I was about 3 meters back and it sounded like a drum to me. I don't know if it just scared the crap out of Sweetheart Horse or genuinely hurt him, but he took off like a rocket. First, Sweetheart Horse ran right past Gentle Horse, who was scared and jumped aside, pushing Cug into the foliage. He took a branch to the face and ribs and got cut up by some sharp leaves. A fraction of a second later, Gentle Horse ran through the horses that Rider 1 and 2 were on, and those horses jumped out of the way, right into the trees. Rider 1 cut her hand up on more sharp leaves, and Rider 2 was knocked off onto the ground by a branch, hurting her neck. Then Gentle Horse hit Mean Horse. Mean Horse thankfully did her duty and made sure that Gentle Horse didn't run past the front of the line. So thanks to Kavina's desire to show me that she knew better, Riders 1 and 2 were both injured, Cog was bruised and crying, and Sweetheart Horse was terrified, sweaty, and shaking. We got Rider 2 back on, and Cog was begging to be allowed to get off the horse. He didn't want to ride anymore. The problem was, we were 2 miles over sand and forest to where we started. He wanted to ride a different horse, but the only one he could swap with was me, and my horse was taller, so that was even scarier. So in the end, I ended up going behind Kavina and Cug behind me. Trail Guide took Riders 1 and 2 and Kavina on the fast trail, and I slowly walked the entire way back with Cug on basically a separate ride. He was on and off in tears the whole way, although it got better with more distance from Kavina. The other 2 riders ended up getting their ride comped. Kavina never did complain about me, and Sweetheart Horse got extra feed for putting up with Kavina. But to this day, I pity Cug. Oh man, that poor kid. Riding horses for the first time can definitely be intimidating, and you shouldn't ride one if you're nervous, because a fall from that high can hurt you pretty bad, and especially if you make contact with one of their hooves. But if you're going somewhere to ride horses, your best bet is to always follow the trainer's instructions and trust them. They know what they're doing. Gosh, that poor kid, he was probably so uncomfortable that entire time. That grandma was a jerk. Guys, that's how you make sure you don't get to see your grandkids anymore. Alright, this story's called This Kevin Thinks That He Knows More About Where I Was Born and Lived for 24 Years than me. So this happened quite a few years ago to me, but on a recent conversation, I remembered about it and thought it would be funny to share. So my wife's dad's side of the family is filled with the most entitled and brown-nosed people you can think of. They all think they are better than everyone else, even though they really are not. And, well, we usually don't confront them about it because it just leads to fights, escalations, things like that. Back when my wife was at the hospital to undergo a surgery, I spent a few days at my father-in-law's sister's house. Now, this woman is something else. She is extremely condescending, thinks that her job is the job because she works at the city hall, even though her job isn't that big of a deal. I think she's some sort of glorified secretary or something. Constantly makes up gossip and fakes tales to gossip around town just to see other people suffering, and is a terrible mother. I could go on for hours about her, but this particular tale isn't about her. Oh no. It's about her husband, Kevin. Kevin is a moron. But he's a moron that thinks he's smarter than everyone else. He will say the most ridiculous things you can imagine, and if you try to talk back or tell him he's wrong, he will throw a fit and rant for hours about how he is right about it and all these facts that he knows and that you don't, and if you say something like, "But there's nowhere speaking about this," then he will claim that he won because, "See, if you can't find it, it is because you don't know how to research it right." He also has this gambling problem where he spends a load of money on online auctions for broken trucks. Not that he ever repairs them or do anything, he just buys them and leaves them in his backyard to rot. One time I was told by my mother-in-law that he had spent over $20,000 on an old truck that only had the metal frame and wheels intact. He claimed that, "I could build a 2-floor mobile house with this." And to my knowledge, he never even began sketching the plans for it. Another thing is that he works as a mason, but he is terrible at it. He never takes measures, lays down foundations, nor anything. He just pours cement, lays the bricks, and done. If it stands, then it stands. If it doesn't, then it's the client's fault for messing with it. My father-in-law told me about one time where they were working on a house, and Kevin placed the windows and used small wires to hold them in place. Now that you know a bit more about this individual, we can move on to the time where I had my first interaction with a guy. So, I'm from Brazil, more specifically, Rio de Janeiro, and I moved to the rural side of Sao Paulo to live with my wife. Like I said, she had to undergo surgery, and I spent a few days in my father-in-law's sister's, for convenience sake, let's just call her Karen's house because it was closer to the hospital to visit my wife since I couldn't stay in the hospital since I wasn't allowed. One day we all had dinner together. Karen had made some cassava manioc. Seriously, America, what the hell is this name? I am 99% sure that is not an American plant. And we were all eating at the dinner room. Then Kevin asked me where I was from, and I said Rio de Janeiro. It was my first year there. They still didn't know me all that well, and I thought that was that. He would ask me about the beaches, landscapes, and things like that. Then he turned to me and said, "So, which factory did you live in?" To which I had to pause for a second to process it. I turned to him and said, "What?" And then the following conversation happened. "Yes, which factory did you live in? After all, Rio de Janeiro is this giant factory complex." Assuming it was some sort of joke, I chuckled and said, "Well, I'm from blank. I've never heard of it. What do they produce?" "I'm sorry?" What product do they produce? You know, like chairs or tables or car parts?" He said that in an extremely patronizing tone of voice to me, which did make me feel a bit insulted, but I just continued to tag along. None of those things. I lived in a condo, and Kevin cut me off and raised his voice. "As if I know that state. It's all just factories and mechanical constructions. I've been there before, you know, so I know exactly all about it. But I get it, you must be still having a hard time getting adjusted to Sao Paulo since it's so different from your old factory. After all, here we plant what we eat. We have rural zones and farms to grow our crops and animals, unlike Rio, which just buys everything processed and packaged from us. You'll see how much more healthy we all are. For example, I bet you never had this soup before because over in Rio, it's all just processed and prepackaged food. Here, we use our stoves to cook. If you want, I could show you what oranges are and how we grow them. It comes from trees. So, yeah, this guy honestly believed that Rio de Janeiro was nothing but factories as far as the eye could see, and that we all lived and worked in them. I was honestly expecting this guy to turn to me and ask if I was a robot too. Well, after that last sentence from him, I had to bite my lip to not burst out in laughter after hearing so much nonsense. But I wanted to know how far it would go, so I turned and said, "All right then, what about our beaches and the Cristo Redentor?" And then Kevin said what was the last straw for me. In an annoyed grunt and a roll of the eyes, he for reals said this. Come on! Everybody knows that statue is just a fabricated myth. It never existed, and you just say that to make us believe you're like us. Honestly, I find it quite low you'd use the saint name of Jesus in such a lie. But what could I expect from a state filled with people that do not have faith in God? I couldn't hold on any longer, and I just burst out in pure laughter. I had a cramp from laughing so much and had to excuse myself to outside to stop myself. I was in tears, I laughed so much. The next day, I went to visit my wife in the hospital, told both her and my in-laws about that encounter, and we had the laugh of the century. Especially since my mother-in-law told me Karen called her, telling her how disrespectful I was to her that day and made fun of her husband when he was just trying to educate me. So, yeah, that was my encounter with the Kevin. After that day, he never really spoke to me anymore other than hi when we came to visit. Hope you had a laugh as good as I had that day. Yo, so people like that actually exist, and that's the crazy part. Who needs dystopian horror when we have reality? I'm kidding, it's not that big of a deal, but that was really funny. We all know people like that, right? And if you don't, well then you are that person. Unless you're me, who is surrounded by nothing but the most amazing people. And I know I don't do that. I'm pretty right all the time, so don't take that seriously as a joke. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode.